Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 164. On this week's episode of the podcast, I will be discussing my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Gen V Season 2. Our spinoff from The Boys is back. Is it able to maintain the momentum? Is it better? Am I feeling kind of done with The Boys? All of those questions will be answered. As this is a TV discussion, all 3 episodes are available on Prime Video, so if you haven't seen them, I'm sorry, this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. But then to wrap up the episode, I will be responding to comments and listeners' answers to Question of the Week. Let's jump into my thoughts on Gen V Season 2, Episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Thanks for letting me re-enroll.
Of course.
I'm grateful. What?
Go on. You're an eye twitch away from leaping across this table and ripping my throat out with your teeth.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Let's not. I know you saw me at Elmira. I certainly saw plenty of you.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing to address would likely be how do they write off, unfortunately, that of Chance's character Andre. Chance tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident prior to the filming of Season 2. That character is given a really well-executed send-off where you take a character who was a burgeoning hero and died tragically trying to save his friends from the Elmira Center. I think handling it in this way, not recasting, and making it a meaningful part of the story is a well-executed thing to do that. There's been conversations about what they were going to do, and now we know what's going to happen. The setup for this season's very interesting because unlike the first season where we had a lot of players in different parts of Godolkin, in different allegiances, in this instance, because of everything that's gone on and the press around what's going on in the United States and its involvement with Godolkin and humans versus soups, and a lot of that being the kind of the crux of where we're going in the Boys universe. I like that this show sets itself apart from the first season where that's kind of all on the table. There's a great conversation with our new Dean of Godolkin, and I like just that outlining. People know where their allegiances lie, and it makes for a really interesting environment, specifically with that of Godolkin, more so than it did even in the first season. Godolkin as a university, the concept that was likely pitched to a lot of the audience was, this is the X-Mansion in the Boys universe, and you know exactly what kind of ridiculous circumstances and debauchery would be included with something in the Boys universe. That's not necessarily shocking. 4 seasons in, and now 2 seasons into the spinoff. But more than anything, what we see from the first 3 episodes is establishing what is the status quo of what's gone on with Homelander now being in charge and officially a part of the government. We have a university that is quite literally being used as the opposite of a think tank. It's trying to mold the minds of all these heroes and create this mentality of hatred towards humankind. On the flip side of that, we get the continuation of where we were at the end of The Boys Season 4, where we get Starlight on the run, having a run-in with Marie, and really pushing her to be a part of this larger story, which is your part of this playground is Godolkin, and there are things involved with Thomas Godolkin having been connected to Vought that we may need from you. It's in the first trailer for the show where they set up this idea of Odessa, and we saw within the first season that Marie's abilities in being able to control things around blood and having almost a Green Lantern construct ability with hemoglobin, how that could be something to take down Homelander. That's been the major threat. Of course, if you're watching The Boys, you know that. How do you take down Superman? If Carl Urban and Soldier Boy were not able to do that, this is what is going to be kind of the build-up for this season and likely a substantial amount of Season 5, which we do know will be the last season of The Boys. Of course, they're also filming Vought Rising, and I'm curious how that's going to connect to the overall narrative. Will it tease any of the aftermath or just be a straight prequel. We'll have to see when that show comes out. But the dynamics between our three main leads with Jordan, Emma, and Marie are very interesting, with Jordan and Emma getting released out of Elmira because of Kate, and having seen the previous season, they would hate her because ultimately she sided with Vought and Homelander, that it didn't matter that this university that was supposed to be this bright spot in creating heroes who were meant to do the greater good saw the ugliness of what the organization was supposed to be for. And her now working for them, but still seemingly try to extend that olive branch to her friends, makes their back and forth really tense. And these conversations, and what makes this show so succinctly different from The Boys, is we are getting young adults, post-secondary, whether that be college or university, trade schools, community college, whatever it may be, is an opportunity for young adults, teenagers, and then getting into your early 20s if you take any extended programs, graduate programs, your master's, doctorate, whatever it may be. You learn the most about who you are in the real world by dealing with all of that. But Godolkin is not doing that for these heroes anymore. It is specifically trying to mold them to follow this rhetoric of humans versus soups. Kate being somebody who is capable of mind control and incepting thoughts into people makes her somebody that, of course, Vought would look at as incredibly important, as opposed to just having fake news on the news with a bunch of our other characters and plugging that in from just a political commentary, when you can just put the thoughts into the minds of the characters. Obviously makes her incredibly dangerous, and they don't like her because of that. Yet, in the social bubble of Godolkin, these characters have to work together, and it makes this show much more in line with the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, when you know, I don't agree with you, but in order for us to survive, we have to just seem like everything is going okay. It's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and it's a great example of the benefits of having this be, in essence, a bubble show. Of course, they're going to go to other places, and I am sure it's going to get wacky, but having the focus specifically be on our three leads and the aftermath of the events of season 1 and seeing where everybody is made this really entertaining. Of course, you're going to get the crude, rude, insane violence you would expect from anything within this universe, and that continues to be a part of it. I have to say, at this point, we are now 5 seasons in total in this universe, going into the 6th season with Gen V Season 2. I sort of just glaze over at that. Unless it's extremely meaningful to the story, it just sort of is extra for the sake of that. Of course, you can use this effectively in instances of that are supposed to be shock and awe, showing the brutality of Cypher's Danger Room, which is another X-Men reference, where he wants the best of the best heroes to really learn more about their powers. And that is a great metaphor for the psychology of growing up. He talks to Marie about, why do you harm yourself in order to use your abilities? Could you not think of a way of using them without doing that? And it'll be really interesting to see what the pathway that is laid out for Marie. Of course, Cypher is somebody who is not to be trusted and an antagonist for this season, but the way that Hamish Linklater plays him, there still is that element of he might actually be trying to help you out, because even with Vought now being run by Homelander and him being an official part of the government, regardless of his allegiances, you are still going to need a safety key or break glass for emergencies if he then flips and winds up wanting to be a dictator over the entire planet as the most powerful soup. That to me is really interesting to see. The open conversations and the back and forth between Marie and Dean Cypher were some of my favorite aspects of this show. I didn't love what the show's doing with Sam right now. Of course, he has a history of mental health abuse, given the fact that he grew up in the woods and had to be medicated. But the puppet marionette controlling of his mind and the unraveling did feel kind of repetitive, as if we've done this before. This is an aspect of The Boys that they do typically lean into with one of the characters. We had it with Black Noir. We have it with Sam. It's funny to see the puppets doing things that college students do in the show, but I'm really hoping that they're able to use this show like they have done so eloquently with The Boys in the past, which is address a lot of serious issues and manage to provide solutions for something, whether that be self-harm, body image issues, which of course we've touched on with the first season with Emma. And if the self-harm is going to be something that we look at with Marie more so, as well as Sam's mental health, I'm really curious to see how they're going to maneuver all three of those really serious subject matters, because they were a significant part of the first season, and it's very clear that they are going to be a part of the second season. I like that we have an opportunity with Emma to show that she doesn't necessarily have to gorge or make herself throw up in order for her powers to be used to grow or to shrink. It's another character who is discovering more about herself. Another aspect of this show that I was really interested in seeing what we were doing, because it was shown in the trailers, which was Andre's dad, Polarity, uses his fame to become a teacher of the university and become a double agent. Typically within this school, of course, all of the adults are the people we can't trust, which does really set up whose side are you on story, and having somebody who is so single focused on what he wants to achieve. I'm curious how much of that we are going to focus on, because the whole setup of the first season was looking at finding what the woods was and then finding Sam. And the concept of Odessa in this clearly seems to be something that is going to be a major part of the show. We saw a flashback to Godolkin in the early days in the 60s when they were developing this, Marie being the only person who seemed to have survived this experimentation, her being such a significant person in the history of this world when it comes to superheroes. Of course, Homelander being the spawn of Soldier Boy. I'll be really curious if we get more of that, or if it's kind of status quo. We're not really giving you a savior complex or a chosen one narrative, which of course is really funnily referenced in the show itself. It's even in the trailer. Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, Frodo, and whatnot. But those characters are dealing with the loss of Andre and knowing that they have to survive university in the public setting, being popular and known in the social media aspect, being number one, you're the coolest superhero. How are all of these conflicts going to result in them ultimately still managing to take down Godolkin and Dean Cypher and Vought? Well, of course, they're likely going to have to segment each of their problems one at a time. I think episodes 1, 2, and 3 do a really good job of establishing the setting of Godolkin, how things have changed in the aftermath, and each of our main players is given their own little story to set up what their motivation is going to be. It works really well that the delivery of the season is 3 episodes. The first episode would have been good enough to give us our main players back at Godolkin, but 3 episodes shows us how they're dealing with being back at Godolkin, how they are reacting to the people, reacting to them being back, being thrust into the public eye, as well as the fact that Kate is giving a story aspect we haven't seen yet, which is very much that of X-Men 3, which is not something I necessarily want to be talking about when I'm discussing The Boys or Gen V, but she currently has no use of her powers. The trauma to her brain from being pushed away by Jordan has taken her identity away from her. How is that going to affect her own psychology, her self-worth? her usefulness to Vought and Godolkin? Is she going to have to side with Marie, Emma, and Jordan because she's no longer useful? That's something I'm really, 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 really curious about. Overall, there's a couple little pieces of the story I didn't necessarily love. I like the fact that we get more about the Starlighters and the Homelander clan dealing with what they're doing and getting to see little glimpses of the real world with Marie prior to coming back to Godolkin. I think that was a good idea to remind us that we are in the boys' universe. And this season, more so than the previous one, within the first 3 episodes at least, shows us much more of the boys. We see the Deep, we see several images of Homelander, and we also see Firecracker running her news segments and spreading lies, which does fit in with what this is going on with this world. Who are they influenced by? Are they capable of having their own individual ideas or thoughts, or just following whatever the trends may be for what's pushed on them by the Godolkin school? It's really interesting and compelling, and I'm glad that this show clearly has its own identity within the boys' universe, but more than anything, so far 3 episodes in, it just doesn't feel like more Gen V. It feels like we are continuing this story with something interesting to say that adds to the previous season and is not more of the same. That would have been annoying. Of course, the setting, being a university, is going to give you somewhat predictable elements, but overall, this 3 episodes has me invested, and I'm very curious on seeing where it goes. Let me know if you watched the first 3 episodes of Gen V in the comments below. Now it's time to jump into listener mail and comments.
Can I ask you a question?
Just one?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what characters from The Boys would you like to see in Gen V Season 2? Some of them were teased in the trailer, and then some of them have been hidden from us, I'm assuming, having only seen the first 3 episodes. Scotty Cameron writes in, I might have to say Tech Knight. I know he died in Season 5 of The Boys. There are ways to work with him in flashbacks or dreams. I just want to see him in costume, a full Iron Man suit with repulsor rays and rocket thrusters. Other characters I'd like to see are some of the G-Men. They are only mentioned in the show, and Groundhawk and Nubia were in The Boys Diabolical. Gen V does take place in the G Manor or the G University, as it's shown, which the G-Men use as their HQ. I love you, Scotty, so much, and what I appreciate is you've read these comics, so there are characters that I have no idea about that may have been vaguely referenced, but I'm not familiar with them within the show. So thanks so much for giving me that significant answer for that. Dylan writes in, I guess A-Train, since he's become one of the most interesting superheroes with his shifting morality. That's really true. One of the coolest parts of the 7 is giving us such specific points of view and having them change. It's not just stuck in their ways. They allowed the story to give them opportunities to change their mind based on the information presented to them. That was really cool. We had some comments on the Star Trek aspect of the episode, which is really cool. Grant Penton 1850 writes in, I enjoyed the Mbenga character far more this season. He's far more mature than when he was obsessed with his daughter. There's still too much of the silliness factor in the writing, but it wasn't overblown as in the previous one. I was expecting worse from the 4.5 Vulcans episode, but it was handled very well. Thanks, and I'm looking forward to what emerges from the studio next year. Really true. I love Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It is the only show outside of Discovery that I have watched all the way through. I mentioned that in my Star Trek shorts that I released last week, and I'd be curious to the listeners what their favorite Star Trek movies were. Check out mine. I'm sure there are going to be people who are upset, but being a casual Star Trek fan, that's what my opinions were. Scotty Cameron writes in to talk about Star Trek. One of the things I like that the show has done is it's featured Kirk as the captain of the Farragut and established his relationship with Pike as one of respect between the two captains. So it set up the stage for when Pike becomes Fleet Admiral, and it'll be plausible when he picks Kirk as the captain of the Enterprise. That's true. To me, what I like so much about that is my introduction to those characters being really fleshed out was that of Star Trek 2009, and that relationship was so important in Kirk joining Starfleet Academy, and getting to see parts of that woven into the story of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is something I really enjoy. Thank you to everybody who submitted their answers for Question of the Week. On to this week's Question of the Week. Inspired by Alien Earth, what is another science fiction franchise you would like to see get a TV series? To answer the question, you can comment below on Spotify and on YouTube. You can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com. If you haven't yet, please leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform, as well as, if you can, subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment below when you have done so. I will read them all, and I love to hear from what the listeners think of the podcast. Alien Earth will come to an end this week, so that is what I will be reviewing next week. I'm loving it, and it is much more of what I appreciate from the Alien franchise than a film we got maybe a couple years ago. So you can look forward to that next week. My name is Kyle Nurania. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and I'll see you next time.